The courtroom fell silent. A 12-year-old boy stood before the judge, his voice steady, his fists clenched. "If the law punishes a hungry kid instead of helping him," Jacob declared, "then maybe the law is wrong." Gasps. The judge froze. The prosecutor's smirk vanished, but what happened next left everyone in shock. Let's start from the beginning. The tension in the courtroom thickened as Jacob's words cut through the heavy silence. Judge Bailey slowly lifted his gaze from the case file, his cold eyes locking onto the boy standing before him. A murmur rippled through the audience. No one interrupted a judge mid-sentence, especially not a child facing conviction. Sarah's fingers dug into the wooden bench, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to scream, to run to her son, to pull him away from this nightmare, but she couldn't. Her breath hitched as she saw the prosecutor's smirk widen, amused by the boy's audacity. Bailey's gavel hovered above the desk, his expression unreadable. "You will not speak unless spoken to," he said, voice flat, final. Jacob swallowed hard but didn't sit down. His small frame, swallowed by the oversized courtroom chair, seemed fragile, yet there was something unshakable in his stance. His hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tightened. "I stole that bread," he repeated, his voice clearer this time. "I knew it was wrong. But my sister was starving. We had nothing left." A hushed gasp spread across the room. The judge remained still. The prosecutor sighed, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Theft is theft, young man," Donovan said, adjusting his tie. "Your personal struggles do not change the law." Jacob turned to face him. "Then the law is wrong." A shockwave went through the courtroom. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Bailey's gavel struck the wood, sharp and final. "This is not a debate," he said. "You've confessed. That is all that matters." Jacob's breath quickened. He had nothing left to lose. He turned back to the judge, meeting his gaze head-on. "Your Honor," he said, his voice unwavering. "If stealing to survive makes me a criminal, what does that make the people who let us starve?" Silence. Sarah's lips parted, but no words came out. Donovan's smirk was gone. Someone in the back whispered, "He's right." Bailey exhaled slowly, his grip tightening on the gavel. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a child. The boy stood tall, eyes burning with something far greater than fear. For the first time in his career, Judge Henry Bailey hesitated. A heavy silence hung in the air. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. No one had ever dared to challenge Judge Bailey like that, especially not a child. Bailey's eyes darkened, his patience wearing thin. "Speak, but choose your words carefully." Jacob took a step forward, his shoulders squared. The fear that had once weighed on him was gone, replaced by something stronger. His voice, steady and unshaken, carried across the room. "I stole because my sister was hungry," he said. "We had no money, and my mom is doing everything she can. I knew it was wrong, but what was I supposed to do? Let her starve?" A murmur spread through the courtroom. Some exchanged glances, unsure of where they stood. Others shook their heads, caught between the cold grip of the law and the raw weight of the boy's words. Judge Bailey's expression didn't change. His voice remained firm, absolute. "The law does not account for personal hardship. Stealing is illegal." Jacob's hands curled into fists at his sides. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He looked up at the judge, his eyes burning with quiet defiance. "Then the law is wrong." Gasps rippled through the audience. A few people sat forward in their seats. Even the bailiff, a man who had seen countless trials, shifted uncomfortably. Bailey's nostrils flared. His grip on the gavel tightened. Excuse me? Jacob didn't flinch. He didn't look away. If the law says a hungry kid deserves to be punished instead of helped, then it's a bad law, he said. His voice didn't waver. You say justice is fair, but where's the fairness in punishing a boy for trying to keep his family alive? The silence that followed was louder than any shout. In the back of the room, a journalist scribbled furiously in her notepad. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Even the prosecutor, who had worn a smug grin since the trial began, shifted in his seat, but Bailey remained unmoved. His expression was carved from stone. I understand your emotions, young man, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. But my hands are tied. The law is the law. Jacob's lips parted, and for a moment pain flickered across his face. His small hands trembled at his sides. Then he lifted his chin, eyes locking onto the man who held his fate. Then why are you a judge? The courtroom froze. Bailey's gavel slammed down. Enough! His voice boomed, making some spectators jump. Sarah buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jacob inhaled sharply. No, it's not enough. I thought a judge's job was to make sure justice is served. But this isn't justice. This is cruelty. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The judge, momentarily caught off guard, hesitated. No one had ever spoken to him like this before, let alone a child. Jacob's eyes burned with something fierce, something that made even the prosecutor shift uncomfortably. If I go to jail, what happens to my sister? Who takes care of her? Does she get punished too? You're punishing me for trying to help her, but no one is punishing the world for letting her go hungry in the first place. A long silence stretched. Then, an older man in the back stood up. He's right, he said, voice thick with emotion. A woman followed. This is wrong. Another person. This isn't justice. The prosecutor looked panicked. This was not how trials were supposed to go. Judge Bailey, for the first time in his career, seemed uncertain. He rubbed his temple, exhaled sharply, and adjusted his glasses. Finally, he looked back at Jacob. The law is the law, he repeated, but his voice lacked its usual authority, and then, after a long pause, he sighed. But perhaps, he murmured, it is time for the law to change. The courtroom was deathly silent. Bailey took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Jacob Miller, given the circumstances, I sentence you to... A pause. The whole room held its breath. 1 hour of community service at the local food bank. A stunned silence. Then, suddenly, applause. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Jacob blinked. What? Judge Bailey actually smirked. You want to help people? Fine. Go help. Spend your time feeding others instead of being punished for trying to survive. People in the audience clapped. Some even stood up. The prosecutor looked furious, but there was nothing he could do. The gavel slammed down. Case dismissed. Reporters rushed out to cover the story. The crowd cheered. Jacob turned to his mother, who wrapped him in a tight hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. As they walked out of the courtroom, a woman stopped them. I run a charity, she said. We help struggling families. I'd like to help you. Jacob's eyes widened. Sarah trembled. You mean it? The woman smiled. I do. Jacob looked back at the courtroom, the place where, for a moment, justice had truly meant something. He felt something new rise in his chest. Hope. The boy who had walked into the courtroom as a criminal walked out as a hero.